Welcome to the Inside Scoop, your one-stop shop for cracking the leadership code. Have you ever wondered what those conversations are like in the boardroom? Curious about the secret sauce successful executives possess? On the Inside Scoop podcast, we sit down with successful executives, getting their unique perspective on what it takes to be a good leader. They'll share their hard-won wisdom, the crucial competencies needed to thrive as a leader, and the unexpected lessons learned along the way. Here, we unlock the secrets of the executive suite. We get the inside track directly from the leaders themselves. In each episode, we'll dissect the essential skills needed to go from manager to leader, offering a leader's perspective on the challenges, triumphs, and unexpected wisdom they've acquired. The Inside Scoop, leadership lessons, served fresh.
It's great to have you with us today for another episode of the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Eduardo Bryant. Here is where we talk about the issues that face all of us because we all have to work. We all got a boss, and it's wonderful when we have a great, supportive boss. It's also something when we have a boss that's not as supportive and certainly not as great. If you hear something that you like, we invite you to subscribe and become part of our viewing audience. Well, we've got a great one for you today. This podcast is available wherever you get your podcast. And joining us is none other than Mr. Marek Wasilewski. He is the Vice President of North America Sales, and I think you are going to want to hear his story. So, Marek, how are you?
With an introduction like this, how can I be any other than absolutely perfect? So it's lovely to be here, and thank you for the invite.
Well, you know, Marek, I think the audience is really going to enjoy hearing your story. So before we begin, I always like to start out with this. As an executive, VP as yourself, North America Sales, tell us, what is it that you're reading right now that's helping you keep your skills up to par?
Good question. So, I'm not one of those guys that will always profess to tell you that the only kind of books that I'm reading are business books. That would be really, really boring, wouldn't it? So, but there are typically, I love a good story and I love a good novel. But so if you're looking about, in terms of fiction books, currently, I'm reading a novel by a gentleman called Ken Follett. It's called The Armor of Light, and it's fifth book in his World Without End sort of a series. At the same time, there is another book that I'm reading, which is obviously more business related, and that it's actually called Sales Coaching Essentials. And it's a program that we've embarked on just recently to ensure that our leadership within the organization has some sort of a blueprint or assistance in terms of how to become a better coach. So those are the two that I'm reading at the moment.
It's good. I'm glad to hear that you got a mixture there. I mean, I agree with your assessment. If all you're reading is self-help books, that'll make you a pretty dull, boring kind of guy, right? It just will, man. You've got to have some fun. You got to do something that also stimulates the mind in some other ways. So that's good. Good for you, man.
Love a good story, my friend. I love a good story.
I mean, I do as well. And I think that's the intriguing part about life. We're all looking for some intrinsic value in things. And a lot of that's in the form of entertainment. I mean, we go to movies, we watch movies on TV, we go on vacation, we go on cruises, we go hiking. We do things that provide us with entertainment because the mind is going to always be kind of stimulated. So that's good for you. Sounds great. It's your track record and your path. Now, where you sit, I call it the perch with which you sit. You know, you've got that big view of all the people that report to you and down below. But I'm sure getting there wasn't as easy as it may sound. I heard something once before. They said, if you ever see a turtle on top of a fence post, know that he didn't get there by himself. he had a little help. So undoubtedly, it's been a little help along the way for you. And so as you think about it, your career path, where you are in life, was most likely not a linear straight line. Share with us, how did Marek get where he is today?
I love that story. I don't think I've ever heard it, but yes, I am one of those turtles on the fence posts. No, it was definitely not what I would call a linear journey. It was a journey, and it still is a journey, but it was definitely not a linear journey. And at times, I've made changes, both conscious and unconscious. And in times, change was forced upon me. One thing that I always talk about is that one thing that is absolutely constant is change, without a doubt. So if you look at my career that spans now over 20 plus years, I started my telecoms sort of a exposure way back in the 90s, where we all still had telephone lines, we all had analog telephones, and I was one of those guys that would actually data fill the actual physical number into a switch. So when you wanted additional features and functionalities, it was me that was doing it, right? So I started on there, but I was always hungry for more. I was always hungry for the learning environment. I always wanted to know how the dots are connected and where that ultimately leads to. And I actually moved on from that particular department, and within 6 months got the opportunity to lead the team associated with it. So moving from there, I kind of went from the technical aspect of telecoms, then I moved more into the sales and the commercial side of it, when the first opportunity that came up meant that I had to put myself, maybe is the best way of describing it, into a challenging situation. I've noticed that chaos theory in my life is ultimately the identifier where I know I'm on the right track. And what I mean by that is, when things go too smooth, when things are too easy, when I feel like I know it all, that's the time to either cause change or to be forced to change. And, I've been fortunate in my life to live in at least 3 different continents and work and lead teams in at least 5 of those. And that means that you've got to be extremely malleable, extremely flexible in terms of how you apply leadership and how you apply your leadership skills to different teams that are situated in different areas. It dawned on me very quickly as a young man that learning from books around leadership isn't necessarily the only way to identify what a good or a bad leader that you are. Understanding the cultures, understanding the individuals that you ultimately engaging with, became more and more important than knowing the process behind leadership. And I've made many changes. As I said, I've lived in at least 3 different continents, which meant that at times an opportunity came up to once again, put myself in a different situation, and to land in an uncomfortable spot, or I was forced into it. In other words, hey, here's an opportunity. We really need you here. And you take it or you leave it, right? And in most of the cases, change for me was as good as a holiday. So, as I said, I am the turtle on the post, and I definitely didn't get there on.
No, that's good. Now, so you talk about living in 3 different continents. Where have you lived?
I've lived in Europe, I've lived in Africa, and I now obviously lived in North America. So those were the three ones. But I've led teams in obviously South America, North America, Europe, Africa, Asia. And if you combine just those areas alone, you don't have to look very far. Even if you look at the European continent, you don't have to travel very far to see different how differently people behave that are perhaps 45 minutes, 2 hours removed from each other, from by a short distance of Germany and France, Holland and Italy, all those places, they're very different. So you've got to learn how to, as I said, you've got to be very flexible.
You know what? That's very interesting. I want to ask you some questions and explore about the chaos part, but in just a moment. But for now, I'm real fascinated with the different continents because here in North America, it's a melting pot. A sales team is going to be made up of not a homogeneous group of people, but really it's going to be a little bit of everybody. And many people have come from different countries, certainly different continents. And so they're operating maybe here in North America, but they still have a history and a background, people that perhaps you have led, So talk to me a little bit about what that's like. Or maybe we could change the question and it could be, what have you noticed over there that's different than here?
Wonderful question. It's a wonderful question. And you're right, it is a melting pot, but yet it's incredible. So I've been in America now for best part of 10 years and become an American citizen 3 years ago, 3 years ago. And one of the uniquenesses that I found about North America specifically is that even though it is a melting pot, and you're right, you've got people coming in from different areas, all driving for the American dream, if you like. However, there's another unique aspect of America that you might not necessarily get in other countries across the world, and that is Texas, as a prime example, which is where I live in Dallas, is very uniquely different from New York. And New York in itself is very uniquely different from California, and so on and so forth. So not only are you dealing with the different nationalities within your state, but that you're dealing with the different states in themselves. And people do behave differently, and doing business in those states is very different. So there's a huge amount of variables that are associated with Americas. And in some cases, especially if you go to not to insult anybody, but I mean, if you look at some of the smaller states in the far removed, people are very set in their ways because they believe in their own unique approach in terms of how they do business, how they lead, how they live their life. And then, you might fly across the continent to the other side from west to east, and you'll find that people behave very, very differently. So that's one of the biggest aspects of a learning curve, and one of the biggest, one of the biggest things that I've learned for sure.
As a manager, being a manager, that's not one of the areas that typically gets trained. So you've got all these people that are in a leadership position, and what you're talking about, Marek, is an area that I think is so underappreciated. And that is the fact that you're leading people that are varied in all aspects of life. And so they come from, everywhere, and they have different viewpoints. And how in the world is a manager supposed to be able to navigate the woes of an intermixed group of people, knowing that the aspects that they bring are vastly different than maybe their own? And how can they be effective doing that? And as you were talking, I was sitting here thinking to myself, that's not an area that we train. I mean, when's the last time you've gone to a leadership conference and they've had that as a topic. When's the last time someone said, wait a
Very
minute,
true.
how
No,
do you
very,
deal with that?
very true. But there's an exciting aspect behind it all, right? And that is, if I had to give an answer in a single word or two words, it would be embrace it. And the quicker you learn to embrace diversity, which is absolutely essential, in my humble opinion, it's absolutely essential to both establishment as well as maintenance of high performance sales teams. The quicker you embrace that, and the quicker that you realize that each individual brings a uniqueness and a unique strength by being different, by coming from a different area, by having a different upbringing, the quicker you realize that each one of us can add a different value to the conversation and a different perspective. And if you don't embrace that, and you don't embrace the different perspective, you will end up being surrounded by people who all think in a monotone tone. And that is not what you want. You want people coming into the conversation, challenging you. You want people coming into this conversation, bringing the different experiences. Because, let's be honest, there's more than one way. There's always one way, more than one way to actually achieving a goal. That's why I keep on saying diversity is essential to a high performance sales team.
So now that sounds great. That's the kind of stuff that you would write in a business plan, submit it to your boss, and he or she's going to love it and say, Marek, you are onto something. That's fantastic. But now let's take this conversation into a space that can be slightly uncomfortable. Let's go somewhere where people don't often want to go because it can step on a few toes. I think you and I can handle this conversation. So let's take it there for just a moment.
Sure.
What you just said, a lot of people subscribe to, but there are a lot who don't for various reasons. They want that monotone. They want that, this is how we do it. Everybody I hire must look like me. Everybody I hire must have had the same similar experience. So if I'm in the semiconducting industry, I only hire people that worked in semiconducting for other companies, our competitors. So we hire them. Or if I went to an Ivy League school, guess what? I'm looking to hire, or perhaps I should say I prefer to hire people from Ivy League schools. There's an area here, Marek, that people simply don't subscribe to, even though you and I and others can look at it on face value and say, that makes sense. We're stronger together than apart, and different ideas coming together will only enhance us. But there are so many who say, not so. We see it all the time. So now, what do you do with these managers who, A, don't know that they are just following a routine that has been born out of some part of their history, or they simply don't care, and they're going to continue to hire the people that fit the mold and the model that they think is best?
Yeah, sadly, this is a reality we're talking about, and the item that you've outlined is 100% true. People in position of power or in the leadership role or management role end up in these positions not necessarily because they are their best to lead a team, but they might have an association with somebody higher up the chain within the organization. And that happens. And as a result of that, it's that narrow-mindedness. And it is a narrow-minded approach, unfortunately. And, yeah, maybe we'll hurt a few feelings along the way, but it's a reality where you will only hire people from a certain demographic or from a certain culture or from a certain vertical or from a certain experience, background, whatever it is, without exploring the opportunity of what a diverse candidate could bring to the equation. It happens on a daily basis, and I've seen it, you've seen it, and obviously that's the reason why you're calling it out. How do you deal with it? That's a very difficult question, and the reason why I say that is because I don't think anybody has actually found a solution, because we're still seeing it today, 2024. I made it my personal goal in the beginning of the year. I said my challenge for the year is to try to find as many career opportunities for individuals that I need. And what I do is I troll LinkedIn, and whenever an opportunity comes in, I'll comment and I'll publicize the opportunity to make sure that we try to find employment for those that deserve it. But as I look at some of those, descriptions, the job descriptions, the criteria associated, in some cases, it is so narrow-minded. And prime example, I saw one 2 or 3 weeks ago. It said, we will only hire from this particular college. And I'm not going to name the college. So, it's a reality. It is absolutely a reality. And in that case, putting an individual who's of a different background into that environment, question I would have for you is, have you done them more harm or more good?
So if I'm answering that question, I think that answer can be both ways.
Sure.
I think you can do more harm in one sense if you don't have the support structure to help that person out. If you just throw them in and everybody is just going to treat them however, there could be some harm done there. But if there's safeguards built in to say, wait a minute, we are not going to do this like this, I think that you can do them a lot of good, because it's a reality. When you walk into a room, whether you like it or not, everybody looks for someone who looks like them. You do. You want to know. I've got friends of Indian descent, and they wear hijab. So they'll walk into a place and they'll look to see if there's anyone else in there that happens to be Indian and they're wearing a hijab. And when they find someone, there's an instant association. Motorcycle riders do it. I mean, you're riding down the road, and if you pass another motorcycle, you will wave or, nod your head because you notice somebody that's on a motorcycle like you. And that's just the reality of life. So the answer can be both ways. And I think as a company, when you put those safeguards in, I think you really help people and you help the organization, because people are looking for that. What about, you go back, say 20, 25 years, most of the boardrooms were all men, very few women. And when you did find a woman in there, you started to judge her, prejudge her, because you figure, how did she get here?
And bias is reality. Absolutely, for sure.
So you talk about management, and for everybody that's driving down the road right now and they're listening to this podcast and they're thinking, I've been in that situation. I'm dealing with that now. That happens at my corporation. We're going through that. What a change. These are the kinds of things that we say, if you want to be in management, let me tell you, you better put your big pants on, because it's not as easy as it sounds. And in the 21st century, and you commented on 2024, I mean, people get their feelings hurt easily now, and they'll run off to HR in a New York minute and complain about something. So, and these things are noticed. I learned years ago that most things are not taught, they're caught. So it's your behavior that people catch and they go, see, that's it. Because we communicate, as you know, more non-verbally than we do verbally. So it's an interesting discussion that can take you into a darker place.
Well, it can, and it can be both a darker place, and it can be enlightening, right? And some call it scars, or you could call it sort of stripes of experience. The
Mhm.
reality of it all is that when you look at leadership, nobody said it was going to be easy. Nobody. And if you do believe that it is easy, I would strongly recommend that you spend a few days in it. You know, I've seen it, and I've seen it time and time again, where we take the best salesperson and we turn him into a manager. And guess what happens? 6 months down the line, they either leave or they go back. Why? Because they love doing what they're doing, right? So I think that's the other bit, is just you're going into it with eyes wide open and you know what the expectancy is going to be on the other side. Good for you. Good for you.
Well, and that speaks to the need for management training. I mean, true management training, not this, we'll send all the managers off to a great place like, I don't know, Orlando, Florida, and be there for 4 days. And we're going to run through, all the other stuff that we got to cover as managers, all the administrative stuff and, compliance and all that stuff, but very little actual tactical,
Yeah.
hands-on management training, stuff that keeps employees from, having a terrible family life or drinking or becoming drug addicts or, heaven forbid, end up in a divorce because of the chaoticness that happens at the job. And that starts normally with their boss. So that's an interesting thing. I did say I wanted to circle back around to the chaos because you were talking about that. And I think this is a good lead into it, is that, yeah, chaos. I mean, how do we deal with that? We have to work. We got to earn a living. How do you manage what we have coined the phrase, the politics, office politics, a level of chaos that nobody wants to deal with? What's the antidote for that?
Well, there isn't one really, to be honest with you, because once again, you're dealing with different backgrounds, different societies, different upbringings, different topics. And the best way to deal with all of that chaos is, it's not an easy way. Once again, it might sound easy, but it isn't. It's to identify what you can and what you cannot influence. And if you cannot influence it, and if you cannot change the outcome, it will be what it will be. But if you can make a few subtle changes here and there, it can make a drastic or can have a drastic change on an individual. My approach to leadership when we're talking about all this chaos, because say, for example, you have 5 or 6 people that are reporting to you directly, and they come from different backgrounds, and they all typically experienced individuals, know how to deal with people, or you would help, and they themselves deal with a different chaos, if you like, within those individual teams. Rather than try to provide a solution, my approach to this is to enable the element of critical thinking. And that is, giving them a snippet of feedback or just repeating what they've said and making sure that you understand what they're going through. And more than likely, when they hear what you've just said repeated back to them, they already know what the answer is, right? And as difficult as it is to be the guy that always provides the answer, sometimes all you've got to do is just provide the opportunity to be heard.
You have just hit upon something that can be taught in an entire college course, and that is people wanting to be heard. It is an essential part of our makeup, especially when you're part of a collective group, like an employment at a job, is that it is vitally important that you have a sense of belonging, and that comes from largely being heard. Everybody wants to feel that their contributions to the organizations not only are important, but are appreciated. And when you're in a meeting and they ask for questions and you have a question, it does you the uttermost good to feel that they're listening to what I'm saying. They can take that back and do some things with it. So wanting to be heard and being heard is so important for everybody. No one wants to just be out there on that island all by themselves, unless that's just the kind of person that you are. But most of us, we want to be part of it collectively. So being heard, what you're talking about, and as a manager, you've got to be able to instill that in your people. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
Here you are, you've got a group of people, let's say, using your number 5 or 6, people that report directly to you, no matter what capacity they're in. You're in a VP role, so they could be a regional manager, they could be a director, and they're reporting up to you. They subsequently have people who report to them in many cases. So now these people, middle management, for example, they've got to make their people feel inclusive, part of, like their opinion really does matter. And you know what you get for that? You get someone who will run through walls for you. There is such a level of respect for you when they know you've got their back, and then they are appreciated. And so that's a skill level. How do we teach that? Marek, how
Well,
do we teach that?
well, I'm glad you're asking this, because majority of the time, I would say, is that, yeah, you can pick up a book and you can read it all about it, right? So just it goes the same way. It's like, rather than providing an answer, provide an opportunity to rethink the problem so that you in turn can answer it yourself. And for me, if I look at this specific scenario that you've just painted, it isn't really about teaching it by providing a manual or a blueprint. It's actually teaching it by being the example, right? And the reason why I say that is that so often, especially now, we've gotten ourselves into a position where first line managers are promoted into a management role, and then they're left unattended. So what happens? Well, the only point of reference that I have is the person that I report to. So what do? I look at the way they behave and how they act and what they do, and I replicate it, because, well, they've gotten to their position by obviously doing what they're doing. So what do I have to do? I have to replicate what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And for me, it's the same thing. You can't just turn around and go, well, we're going to be an all-inclusive an organization. We're going to generate a high-performance sales team. We're going to make sure that we forecast every week accurately, and we're going to do all of those things. But that's the extent and the end of the training. 60-70% of leadership lies outside of knowing how to forecast. Especially in sales. So for me, the element is that you cannot have a high performance sales team without creating the environment of safety. And that is safe to be who you are, safe to ask the question, safe to answer questions without being ridiculed or being frowned upon. And that is the example that you want to set. And that is the example that ultimately you want to ensure that your first line, second line managers follow. And being the guy in the room that answers last is the damnedest hardest thing on the planet. Because so often we want to, we listen to reply rather than to hear, unfortunately.
Man, if you got a hammer and I'm holding a nail, you are smacking it straight on the head. That's good stuff right there, because these are the things that don't often get talked about. We think about them, we know that they occur, but now to become a really good manager and to become really skilled at your job, it's some of these things that you have to take into account and master them as best as you possibly can and recognize it, so that you can be that person. So that chaos that we're talking about, it's there, Marek, it's there. It's all about how we manage it, what we
Sure.
do with it, and how we start eliminating it as much as we possibly can, especially when we have lives in our hand. You commented earlier about a person who is in say, an independent contributor role, and then they get bumped up into a management role. They leave for a variety of reasons. Sometimes they didn't realize what was there and what they'd have to be involved in and what all they'd have to do. Sometimes they just don't have the skill set for it.
That's right.
That's a big area too. You know,
That's,
managers knowing how to source out good talent
exactly.
at the next level. And just because you're great at this level, everybody knows that doesn't make you great at the next level, because we all know that those are totally different skill sets
Right.
that are needed. But companies do it anyway. And it's individuals that put these people in this spot, almost like a reward system. You know, you've been around for a number of years, you've done a great job, you want to move up in the company, we're going to reward you with that. But they may not be the right person.
Yeah, so often, unfortunately, it does happen, and we know what needs to happen, but it doesn't happen because there's a perception that the change is too painful. It's too much of an effort. So let the sleeping dogs lie. Right? Why change it? Things are good enough, so let's just leave them as they are.
Is that the old, if it's not broken, don't
If it's
fix
not
it?
broken, indeed.
You know what? That's really good, Marek. You know what? I've enjoyed this, man.
Loved it. Thank you.
Yeah, getting into the weeds on some things, some areas that aren't often talked about can be somewhat uncomfortable, but recognizing that we're all human. We're going through this. We deal with this stuff on a daily basis. I mean, we get into these conversations all around the country with various companies on what types of pain points do they have? What are they facing? It's these challenges that come up. So being able to help people, and I believe that even today, we've probably helped some managers who say, you know what, that's me, or at least that's, happening in my organization. So I appreciate you being able to be
Thank you. Eduardo, if anything, I sincerely appreciate your time, and to your point. I hope I've added just a little bit of value somewhere to somebody, and if I had, job done, as they say, right? And that's the most important bit. And just keep being human. We all make mistakes. We all strive to do good, and as long as we keep on doing that, we're on the right path. But you've made this so easy, and I thank you for the conversation, and I thank you for your time today. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Well, I'm sure you have helped people. I'm sure that you have, and you're very welcome. So thank you for that. And thank you all for joining us for this episode of the Inside Scoop. Once again, if you enjoyed some of the things and if they resonated with you, we invite you to subscribe to us and become part of our viewing audience. We certainly would appreciate that. Until we come together again on another episode, thank you. Certainly thanks to our guest, Marek. And for now, have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye for now.
For more exclusive leadership insights, be sure to subscribe to the Inside Scoop on YouTube and Spotify. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit that share button and spread the word. See you next time on the Inside Scoop.